with the title of Sustainability in our next session. Now, when it comes to buildings, let's start with that straight.
Are we talking about buildings
We are definitely doing that today.
Quiz for the audience. What percentage of greenhouse gases come from buildings?
The first
40%.
Perfect, as in 1 equals 4. That's good. Buildings represent nearly 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Now, what are the major trends in making buildings more sustainable?
So thank you very much. And what an honor and privilege to be here in the kingdom, and certainly with this amazingly distinguished panel. So thanks very much for including me. You know, there's a challenging bit of news in that 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions. That's a lot to tackle. But when you think of any challenge, there's always an opportunity in there somewhere. So the flip side of one sector, just one sector, representing that much of the global greenhouse gas footprint, is that there is a heck of a lot of inefficiency to be gone after in those buildings. Now, one of the key reasons that in this particular challenge, that's good news, is because another way of saying inefficiency is waste. We're wasting resources and we're wasting dollars and cents. And so when we prioritize efficiency, those innovations cash flow to enable us then to go after truly not just reduced emissions, but net zero. So as we think about it, it really is a trifecta. It's about energy efficiency first on the front end, but then it's about electrification and digitalization. And so there's been a lot of conversation here on the electrification side. You know, it's so exciting to see this kingdom now, no pun intended, but driving the electric vehicle future. Because at the heart of decarbonization is really an electrification of the entirety of our economic systems, and buildings need to be part of that. You've heard about the magical machine, as we call it, which is that electrification powerhouse, and that's a heat pump. But there's one other dimension that I thought, especially in this region, if I could share, why is it that a heat pump is able to achieve so many multiples of workable energy? Relevant the worldwide, but certainly in the Middle East, is because other kinds of heating and cooling destroys water.
Right.
A heat pump instead, when we grab the heat out of the air so that we can then push cool air through the building, most times other ways of cooling take that heat and evaporate it with water, billions of gallons of water lost. But instead, the buildings that we're privileged to build with heat pumps here in this region are not only net zero, they're net energy positive, and in one particular case, cutting water use more than 50% from where it had previously been. On the electrification piece, you'll see it displayed out there, and you've heard it referred to. Our digital platform is called Open Blue. And you might say, well, why is that so important? And the key reason is twofold. One is that efficiency on the front end, 20% off, that's not net zero. A heat pump will give you another 50% on top of that. Maybe you're at 70%, it's still not net zero. The digitalization does two things. It enables that hyper-efficient HVAC system, that heat pump, that right now can only see itself, to see, hear, and listen to the security system, the lighting system. And what does that do? That enables the building totally to be optimized, because the HVAC is being told by the security system, there's nobody on the 4th floor, no need to blow all of that air conditioning to that part of the building at all. And then the last thing it enables is once you've got all of those systems, you've broken down the silo that was that heat pump, so they're all talking to each other inside the building. Now the good part comes, because with a digital platform like OpenBlue, that building, which used to cost you a lot of money, becomes a revenue center, because it itself can then talk to the grid and start selling excess electricity back. So we go from a problem to an opportunity, and it's about magic machines like heat pumps and digital platforms, like we are proud to have our center of excellence right here in this kingdom.
It's absolutely amazing. I mean, it takes me major interest to see a lot of people talking about smart buildings and smart cities and smart houses. Yet when it comes to them being smart and not making decisions, such as decisions you make, they're not smart. They're just autonomous, or they're automated. But smart is what you mentioned, them taking decisions and helping in that as well.
You know, a real wake-up call just on this point came to us through another challenge, which was COVID, and I say that in the past tense, which is COVID. But here's some of the stats that we saw in the height of the shutdowns, in the lock-ins that we had during COVID. So while you had an 80% reduction in most commercial buildings in terms of occupancy, you only saw a 20% reduction in energy consumption in those buildings. And you may say, why? Who's minding that shop? Well, the bottom line is nobody really. One, everything is on a set point regardless of who's in the building. But typically, buildings today aren't smart. They are analog. They're not digital. So they have one giant switch.
Yes.
And that switch is on or it's off. And bad things happen when a building is turned totally off. What digital gives you is the ability to meet the need in that building, support the functionality in the building without chewing resources when that functionality has turned into a sleep mode.
Brilliant. No more mention of a smart building unless it makes decision, takes decision, and help you to make a sustainable environment in that building. Now, with sustainability being a major importance to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, from your perspective, Dr. Samar. Now, sustainability in Saudi, I mean, for 100 years of Saudi now, how sustainability is important now?
Sure. First of all, I would like to thank Jooonson Control for this great invitation. Thank you so much. And it's always nice to see great ladies talking about energy security and renewable energy. While I'm doing my research, like back in, let's say, like when I went to UK in 2009, I was all the way alone. I was like talking about energy security as a lady. It was a little bit difficult at that time, but now we can see actually a lot of great ladies joining the sector. So now I'm going to actually wear the academic hat, and I'm going to talk more about education and about why sustainability is important when we think about, schools, education, and even when we think about the impact of the students from the classroom and how they actually can bring some knowledge from the school to their house and to their family or friends. So your question is why sustainability is important, or how it's important here in Saudi Arabia. It is important, and if we think like a decade ago, when we were talking about energy security, renewable energy, energy efficiency, and all other alternative energies, it was only about talking about interesting topics or hot topics. Not only in Saudi Arabia, but maybe the whole world. When we talk in the media or even in the social media or magazines, newspaper, even including myself, when they asked me, why did you select the energy sector at that time? And I was like, because it's a very interesting topic. And at that time, there was no vision. We didn't have a specific target at that time. So I was focusing more in the awareness in the schools and even in the universities. So your question's also reminding me of one of the research I did at that time. It was about investing consumer awareness and behaviors with energy efficiency and energy and sustainability. And I have a great and funny result. So we always think that sustainability and energy efficiency, we don't know how we define it. Like it's not here in the room, but maybe when we talk like in the public or in the school or in the university with different majors, that they don't know anything about energy. So when I asked public, like I was trying to collect data, and 48%, they said, yes, we know what's the meaning of energy efficiency, but to be honest with you, we don't apply it in our daily life. So this is like, and then when I ask them, can you define it for me, just to be sure that they know the definition? Believe me, they all define it right, but they don't apply it in their daily life, which is, I don't know, to be sad or to be happy at that moment. And then when I asked them, are you aware about the electricity bill in your house? Like every month, do you know how to read the kilowatts and the electricity? They said, no. So it was like 58%. They said, no, we don't actually look at the kilowatts. We look only about the cost at that moment. So,
you know,
like exactly.
Yeah.
So they don't link between what they are paying and what they are actually receiving. And when I ask them again, so what will motivate you to be more like sustainable and to be like to use the energy efficiency in your daily life, in your office, in your home? So 41%, they said we need more energy efficiency and sustainability awareness in our country, because we know what's the definition of the word. We know where can we use it, but unfortunately, we don't know why we have to do it. So, and then 31%, they said, we want to save the environment, because actually this is the concept that always comes to our mind. So it was good that they are thinking the same thing about sustainability. And only 25%, they said, we are only want to save energy because we don't want to pay a lot at the end of the month. So, and also, after actually this research, I wrote an article about energy efficiency, the first renewable. So it's not about like, like inject more projects and using the technology in your country. It's about how the community, how the citizen are aware about what you are using. And so back to your question again, why it's important, we should focus more in Saudi Arabia, not only about, with all the huge project actually that we are doing now, we need only to focus on the education sector. We need to look, we need to see how the students are really understanding what the industry are doing. I did also a quick discussion with my daughter about the word استدامة and about sustainability. Istidama is the word in Arabic. And I think most of us agree that we don't use the word istidama here more. So it was a group of girls, and I asked them, they are 14 years old, by the way. So I told them, do you know what's the meaning of istidama? And they said, no. Is it, like guessing, but no one actually give me the right word. So then the funny thing, one of them, she said, Auntie Samar, do you want me to use Google to translate it for you? And I was like, no, thank you. I know what's this, but I just want to test you. So when I asked them about sustainability, they said, they give me actually the definition in Oxford Dictionary. So they said, this is actually, they didn't link it with energy. And this is, to be honest, I was really sad because my daughter, she doesn't know what's the word sustainability, and her mom is working with the energy sector. So I think this is my mistake. But to go back to the education sector, yes, we need to focus more because it's really important to not only know the definition of the word, and it's important to know why we need it in our country.
It's like parallel effects or efforts that go with education, with implementing projects, as well as raising the price of electricity so that people are more cautious of it.
Sure.
Definitely, I mean, that happens, so yes. As well, now if I go to Dr. Sameh, now definitely energy is of importance, and we're talking here about everything to do with actually energy and multiple ways of sustaining that energy. Now, when it comes to energy management and its support for the national targets of grid resilience and sustainability, what's your comments regarding this topic?
Thank you, Faisal, thank you, and thanks for Johnson Control and JCI for inviting us today. Actually, this happened by coincidence, but I think Katie gave me a beautiful link to what I'm about to say, and even Summer, I'll go back to circle to Summer's comment later. But there should be a paradigm shift in how we view end-user consumption. That's definitely step one in taking the load or the end users from a stress point on the grid to a support system on the grid. I mean, classically, load, the generation, the grid always followed the load. That was the classical definition of a power grid. And by the way, in the notion of smart grids, I'm one of those people that always says a power grid by inception was a smart grid. So let's not talk about smart grids. Let's talk about intelligent grids. Let's talk about really, really smart grids, which Katie mentioned, ones that actually respond. We'll get to that. So classically, the load has always been the master on the grid.
Yes.
Now, there should be a paradigm shift to understand that this load can be a support system for the grid. So how do we do that? We do that by proper energy management. What's proper or active energy management or advanced energy management? Whatever you want to call it. You've got to monitor. You have to listen at high resolution. You go to beyond the chiller. Go to the number of people in rooms. Go to humidity. That's the monitoring part. Then you got to go into the analytics, the advanced analytics, the rules engine. Make sense of this data, of these different types of data around you. And then go into the acting part. After you've done that, now how do you bridge to the grid? You've got to aggregate. That's the missing part. You have to take these end users, actively manage them, make them really smart, intelligent, but then you got to aggregate them at a scale and take them up to the grid scale. Now, case in point, to take an example, let's talk about national targets. Let's talk about national targets. Net zero, sustainability. What's the ABC of a power grid? Make no mistake about it. It's grid reliability. Resilience, reliability, resilience, security, stability. That's the ABC of a power grid. By the second it was incepted, a grid always needed reserve, always, to be able to operate securely. So when we talk about national targets, right, net zero, what's required? More penetration of renewable energy on the grid. By definition, renewable energy for the most part is volatile. Volatile means more uncertainty, means more problems on the grid, means the power grid needs more reserve, needs more flexibility, different characteristics of flexibility, within seconds, primary, secondary, within minute, spinning, non-spinning. So let's agree on that. The more we want to meet national targets, there's no escape from that, guys. We need flexibility. So there is a huge demand for this new token of flexibility on the generation side. Okay, let's go on the end user side. As Katie was mentioning, the megawatts, and here I'm talking megawatt, not megawatt hour. Megawatts are all around us. Look at this building. How much megawatts or how many megawatts or kilowatts can we reduce within 10? Multiply it in sites, 1,000 sites. So the flexibility tokens are all around us.
True.
The supply for flexibility is here. It's right there. It's a green field. We have a demand at the grid side, and we have a supply at the end user side. And also at the end user side, again, as Katie mentioned, and going back to JCI's platform, the IoT is all over, is everywhere. The technology is there. All what we need to do is aggregate this demand or this supply of flexibility and take it up to the actual demand for it at the grid side. That's how you take energy management, take it up to the grid and meet national targets.
Interesting. Now, Ms. Katie, when it comes to our current times, you mentioned pandemics before, but yet when it comes to everything that is going on worldwide, when it comes to certain wars, supply chain issues, when it comes to as well the pandemic that we went out, not yet, but we're still within that pandemic. Now, there are a lot of trends of sustainability, yet there got to be an importance for what to focus on in sustainability, as well as what to focus on as the priority in sustainability. And how would you define that importance?
So it's a very interesting question, because to say that we live in interesting times is an understatement. And the only thing that's certain now is uncertainty and change. And there have been a tremendous number of almost unprecedented challenges, and all coming at the same time. I will date myself. So I have been working on climate and sustainability for more than 30 years now. And it's been a boom and bust business. right? So at least in the United States, if you have more liberal-leaning politics, we could talk about the environment, we could talk about climate. The political pendulum swings the other way. It's no longer interesting or on anyone's agenda. And similarly, it's been pegged to commodity prices. So if the commodity price of energy goes through the roof, then all of a sudden it's of interest and it's a crisis and something needs to be done, and the opposite is the case too. So we now have an incredible test as to whether we have a stick and stay with respect to climate and sustainability, or if it gets pushed off the radar. So KPMG released a study about 3-4 weeks ago, surveying hundreds, I suppose, of CEOs, and they asked this very question. You've got a lot on your plate. Are you still caring about climate and sustainability? Now, I will tell you, their first answer was to say, geez, we don't know if a recession is coming. We're kind of focused on that. But here's the interesting piece. 70% said this stays on the agenda. It stays on the agenda because we have now seen demonstrated proof that our financial performance has been enhanced because we've become focused on ESG. And to me, that's about a couple of things. Some of it is new, and some of it, I think, is reflective of some just beautiful wisdom and approach that a couple of us have had the privilege to see even as we've been here in the kingdom. And what I have in mind is this. So part of the reason that sustainability is now helping to drive profitability and financial results is because it's gone from the periphery of what people think about to something that's part of the heart and soul, driving the mission, the purpose of a thing. And why do I say that? I'm reminded of that here. The other night, Mohan, we had a wonderful tour guide in taking us to the old city in Jeddah. Now, if you think of the buildings in the old city, what mostly comes to mind, jumps right out, I'll say for myself, the Roshan.
Yes.
That was a time when the HVAC wasn't a secondary thought, bury it in the basement, has nothing to do with my home, my castle. It was part of the signature piece of why that bricks and mortar is really my home. It's the heart and soul of who I am and my family is. We're starting to get back to a little of that. And no one's going to be able to speak to it better than you, because there's a punchline that has to do with young people, I think. But here's some of what we see. So we'll be brought in by a CEO who says, I got COVID, I got a recession, I got supply chain problems, you need to cut my energy bill. And what we find is the CEO will come to realize the same temperature and humidity sensors for a CEO of a hospital that enables us to dial the HVAC down is the same set of sensors that enables us to scrub a virus out of the air. So now the HVAC is driving the mission of the hospital of ensuring against infections. In a stadium, that same digital platform, again, that's saying, hey, nobody on this side of the stadium, dial it down, is the digital platform that's now enabling someone to have true delight in being a fan, because in their little device like that, that same platform is allowing them to order a replay of the last play. So what we're talking about here, the technology that you're so expert in broadly, is taking sustainability from a nice to have to a strategic imperative, and maybe along the way tapping into old wisdom that these things should be brought in heart and soul. And last thing, and maybe as a toss over to yourself, I think we all know if you have a choice between a good business plan and an uninspired team, an inspired team and a so-so business plan,
The second one.
you go with the team And in a country like this, with such a generation of young people, they want mission, they want purpose. Put sustainability out there, what do young people do?
Oh, yes.
Can I toss
Oh,
it?
yeah, absolutely.
So this is a question
the
directed to
ladies
me.
are sticking
Definitely.
together.
We're always supporting the
Exactly.
ladies. Right?
So I always actually say to even to my student when I used to teach in the university, I always tell them the kingdom are lucky to have a huge pool of young professionals. And we are all know that the professionals are all around, you know, like the world, here in Saudi Arabia, companies. But if you want to build, sorry, the mic, okay. If you really want to build a professionals, just go to the school and try to build them from scratch, from there, and then you will find them there waiting for you after graduating from the university. Exactly.
Definitely.
And by the way, we are doing this a lot here in the country. If you are aware about MISC programs,
Yes.
they are actually, my daughter actually is applying next year. They are supporting the young generation when they are 15 years old to join a leadership program.
True.
So they took them like a very top university around the world, and they actually led them to investigate the world from different perspective. So they're preparing them to join top university around the world when they reach 18 years old. So the kingdom are doing great now in that.
Definitely. And definitely there's a culture, a whole culture that within sustainability should be delivered to decision makers, to households, to as well education. And when it comes to it, applying it truly, not an upcoming business, but businesses that are already standing. So we get literally efficiency when it comes to energy. Now, we got to achieve something when it comes to energy. So the main achievement from your perspective that has more priority and we should work on now would be what in the energy field?
Well, to think of the achievement, let's think of the challenge, and let's get real. I think this was mentioned.
I'm just getting water. Part of our hospitality to see somebody cough is to go and pour him some water. This is a Saudi culture thing. This is me, so I noticed you coughing. I do apologize, doctor. But please, no. That's a culture. That's a culture. Please.
Thank you.
Follow, doctor.
Thank you. You're extremely kind. Thank you. So if we want to get real, let's talk about the challenge. And this was mentioned many times. It's the financials, right? It's the commercial model. I mean, we heard in the morning about solution as a service. We heard about investments, right? That you gotta invest at the end user level. So the main challenge is that commercial model. But what's the solution? What's the achievement, right? We talked about the aggregator. We talked about the demand at the grid side and the supply at the end user side. We have the main characteristics of a market. What's a market? A market, by definition, is a framework that takes demand and supply, let them meet at an equilibrium for a price, right? Sure. So we have the demand, we have the supply. Unfortunately, in our part of the world, we still don't have the market. We don't have the full liberalization of the electricity sector. And that's the reason this concept of aggregation and this concept you were talking about of active involvement from the end user to the grid hasn't flourished yet. But that doesn't mean we don't have a solution. The solution is this entity, this role of the aggregator. What does this role do? What does this aggregator do? It identifies the price by which the generation side, the grid, is willing to pay for the flexibility. So that's the price. And it goes to the end users and quantifies the cost by which it's able to meet that demand from the supply side. So here you go, you've connected the demand and the supply. And then let the powers of the markets, let capitalism do its role. Let it do. If the cost of getting what the grid is requiring is cheaper, and it will be definitely cheaper, believe me, that's my bread and butter. It's cheaper than where the grid could have gotten what it needs from the thermal power plants. Here you go, you have a market. You've identified the bridge to take the savings from the grid side into GCI and the end user to be able to finance the megawatts of flexibility that are needed. But what's also the value of this? Once you've established this, what happens at the end user side? It flourishes. Everything, every dream we're talking about, smart cities will flourish and the money will be there. Why? Because now you have that entity in the middle that have identified the cost per megawatt of additional flexibility. Call it cost per data byte of additional sensor you're going to put into your end user. Now we're talking about distributed storage. We're talking about distributed solar. We're talking about electrical vehicles. Why? Because the aggregator now knows that if I deploy in this beautiful city, small mini city we're in right now, few electrical buses, for example, this is additional storage for the grid. That's additional flexibility. But the aggregator by now has already identified where the money is coming from. So it's mostly suitable, that entity, that role, whatever you want to call it, in the middle, now has that high resolution depiction, has all the analytics, has all the intelligence, now understands the route planning of citizens in this city, in this mini city, connects it with another city, understands that. If I deploy an electrical bus here with X megawatts of storage, and I understand, the dynamic, the patterns of movement, people using these cars, etc., I know that at certain times in the day, I can enhance the amount of storage I can use, or flexibility that I can use, that I can sell back to the grid. And that's how the value chain, the full value chain gets unlocked, because that entity now disperses all of this distributed capabilities at the end user side. Mind you, doing all of this in terms of smart cities from an energy point of view at the distribution level is not easy. Net meters, rooftop solars is not simple. You're creating big problems at the distribution level.
Yes.
Big, control areas, etc. But the aggregator, again, can provide the service to the distribution network. So from a technical point of view, is capable of meeting the requirements, and is also capable of creating the financing bridge, if you want, artificial financing, into creating virtual power plants, which we all heard about, and then connecting it to the grid. And what happens at the grid side? More renewables, net zero targets, and at the end user sides, more solar panels, more energy efficient systems. Here you go, net zero is being met at the generation side and at the distribution side. And last thing I'm going to say, it's a win-win situation for everybody. Because it's a free, it's an open, it's a market. There's a price and there is a cost. Last thing I said also I wanted to just go back on Summer's point. I was discussing it with my colleague, and I'm going to lead up to it. The market. I mean, one thing we were talking about, you want to teach your kids, it's all about the market. Let our kids, starting with my own kids, let them pay out of their salary, let's say, or whatever, out of their allowance for the amount of energy they're consuming. Let's quantify the problem. Let's quantify the problem. That's the creativity we need to do. In the last note, I promise this is going to be my last note, but
Take your promise.
Also, in order to achieve that, technology is there,
Yes.
right? But again, if we want to be real and if we want to be technical, we need fast response. If we need to really unlock fully the value chain and deploy electrical vehicles and really aggregate tens and thousands of sites and connect them to the grid, the problem analytically is going to become really big. Response speed is going to become very important. You're talking about primary and secondary regulation. So what's the solution? Artificial intelligence and machine learning.
Yes.
And that's where we've partnered with our colleagues in Deep Air. They're going to talk later, where we've identified these use cases that I'm talking about. We've defined the problem, we've formulated the problem, we've created the entire bridge for it. But now, if technically we really want to support the grid, we're deploying machine learning and AI to it so that the problem, the solution becomes faster,
Definitely.
more accurate, and keeps evolving.
MashaAllah, tabarak
Thank you so much.
Dr. Sameh, thank you. And for the panelists, thank you so much for your time. With us was Ms. Katie McGinty, VP, Chair, Sustainability and External Relations Officer, Dr. Samar Khan, Renewable Energy and Sustainability Expert and Writer, as well as Dr. Sameh Al-Khatib, CEO of SmartWatt. Thank you so much for such panel. Sustainability. Thank you. Thank you. Now we're taking a group photo. الله يسعدك يا رب. في موجود. اليوم قاعد اجمع مويه، اقدم مويه واجمع مويه. بسم الله. Take a photo.